Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another installment of our Web Jam series hosted in collaboration with Whiteboard Labs. I'm your moderator for this evening. I know my face might look very different because you're probably used to Dr. Cleveland Sam moderating these sessions, but today the roles are switched and he's going to be our presenter for today. So let me give you a little bit more about him. And Dr. Sam is a Vincentian national who has made the Caribbean his home. He has worked and lived in the British Virgin Islands and Barbados over the last 25 years. He's a communication and marketing professional who operates within the education space and recently completed his Doctor of Education in Higher Education Leadership with the UWI Open Campus. He holds a Master's of Journalism Studies with distinction from Cardiff University in Wales and diplomas in Mass Communication and Public Relations from UWI Mona and Holborn College, respectively. He also has certificates in stakeholder management and copy editing from the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and UC Berkeley in the United States, respectively. He's currently the Marketing and Communication Manager of the UWI Open Campus and is currently based in Barbados. But prior to working at the Open Campus, he spent 16 years as Public Relations Manager at the Caribbean Examinations Council. He also served as Communications Consultant with the Public Sector Reform Program in the BVI and the Public Relations and Education Officer with the BVI National Parks Trust. Cleveland has presented at several regional and international conferences and seminars on various topics, including blended learning towards a better normal at the Ministry of Education in Trinidad and Tobago Environmental Annual Conference, International Benchmarking the Caribbean Certificate of Secondary Level Competence by the UK NARIC, presented at the Association of Caribbean Territory Institutions Annual Conference in Bermuda, and Image of Self-Gender, Youth and the Media, presented at UNDP UNIFEM Workshop in Barbados, to name a few. But Cleveland is a father and considers himself a super daddy. And we are excited to have him presenting tonight to talk to us on the topic of communication in Industry 4.0, keeping along the same veins of our Web Jam series that we host in collaboration with Whiteboard Labs. And so we're very excited to welcome him. So without further ado, over to you, Cleveland.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that introduction. And it is indeed my pleasure to be here. And of course, to have the roles all switched up. Today, as Jamie said, normally I would be the host of this program, but I am delighted today to be the presenter on a very interesting and, rewarding area, communication in Industry 4.0. Now, in the last couple weeks leading up to this webinar, as I shared the promotion with some of my colleagues and friends, everyone was asking, what is I.4.0 and so on. So I'm happy for those of you who have joined us, whether you are my colleague, friend, family, wherever in the Caribbean, wherever you are in the world, because obviously, as Jamie said, we are doing this in collaboration with our colleagues at Whiteboard Labs in India. So what am I going to deal with this evening? I have a few learning objectives, and I'm just going to share them with you so that we understand we're all on the same page. So at the end of this presentation, you would be able to define communication, explain what Industry 4.0 is, and locate communication within the context of Industry 4.0, demonstrate the understanding of the linkage between Industry 4.0 and communication, and identify at least 5 of the 10 essential communication skills that I'm going to share with you this evening, and define the barriers to communication and provide solutions to overcome those barriers, and distinguish between open and closed questions. So here we go. Communication is simply the act of sending and receiving messages. Now, that is a very simplified definition of what communication is. Of course, if you look through any communication text, I'm sure you would find a myriad of definitions. One that I always remember, one of my professors at the at Caramak, at Mona, communication is the exchange of information between intelligences. And of course, communication has very elements, three basic elements. One, there must be a sender. Two, there must be a message. And three, there must be a recipient. Communication tends to be very complex, and hence why the skills needed in communication are so desired by employees around the world. The accuracy, effectiveness, and unambiguous. And this is basically a pictogram of what the communication process looks like. As I said, there is a sender, there is a receiver, and there's an interpretation of the message. However, as I would say to you that this is a very simplified version of what the communication process looks like, because as you are well aware, there are different things that happen in between sending and receiving a message. In communication terms, we call some of those things noises or obstructions or barriers. So for example, the medium you use might be one of those barriers. Language might be one of those barriers. So we're going to discuss those in more detail. So simply put, this is the communication process. There's a sender of a message, there is a receiver, and the message has to be interpreted and returned to demonstrate understanding. Now, Industry 4.0. As I said, quite a number of my colleagues and friends and families have been asking me, what is Industry 4.0, or as we had on the flyer, I4.0, sorry. So basically, what we have over the last couple of centuries were various stages of the development and progress of our commercial world. So if you look at my slide, we had Industry 1.0 in the from 1784, we had Industry 4.0, and this is where we had the steam power, the weaving loom, and mechanization of production. Then in 1870, we moved to Industry 4.2, and we had mass production, assembly lines, as well as the benefit of electrical energy. And then in 1969, we moved to Industry 3.0. We had automation, we had computers and electronics. And as a result of that, there was a significant boom in economic activity around the world, particularly in countries like Asia, in areas like Asia and Europe and the United States and Canada, where they were able to take advantage of the age of computer and automation and electronics. And now, in our present time, the 2000s, we have Industry 4.0. And here we have cyber physical systems, the Internet of Things, and significant networks. So in a nutshell, really and truly, Industry 4.0 is otherwise known as the Internet of Things or the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And a simple definition is the digital transformation of manufacturing enabled by internet technologies to create smart products, smart production, and smart services. Now, we all know what these things are. Most people now have a smart television. So your television is no longer just a television. It can act as so many different things. It can act as your computer monitor. It can act as your alarm clock, and so many other things. You can do so many things with your television now because it is using big data and digitization to enable what is happening in the back end of the computer. And of course, all of this is enabled by internet technology. Now, how do we locate communication in Industry 4.0? And first and foremost, we need to embrace the processes of automation and digitization. We need to embrace those processes because that's where we are going, that's where the world has gone, and we are not turning back. Technologies complement rather than replace human skills. And I want to emphasize that because even though this webinar is entitled Communication Industry 4.0, we need to recognize that communication is a critical skill in whatever era we are, whether it's prehistoric times, Industry 4.1 or Industry 4.3 or Industry 5.6 or whatever is going to come in the future. With the rise of Industry 4.0, uniquely human traits become even more critical. And some of these traits are curiosity, creativity, empathy, problem solving, and critical communication. And that is where my emphasis is going to be tonight, how critical communication skills are really going to be the drivers of how we work and live in Industry 4.0. And I would also suggest to you in future Industry 0.5, 0.6, you know, as I said. So I have a quote here from a journalist in Brazil, Luis Gualea. He says, and he's referring to the technologies, as such a revolution demands not only technological knowledge on the part of the professionals, but also precious personal abilities. And he lists some of these personal abilities as the passion, being passionate about learning and unlearning, collaborative capacity under pressure, working in networks. And in this era, we see that working in networks is so critical, because I'm sure all of you on this webinar can relate to working in some type of network, whether it's at your workplace, whether it's in a club, and the networks are no longer just within your workplace or in your country in a physical location. They are right around the world. In fact, this very webinar is a good example of that. The UWI Open Campus based in the Caribbean, we are our colleagues all the way in India and in Australia. So that is one example of working in network. The capacity of working in an ambiguous environment. Now, we know, I mean, that comes down to the whole issue of problem solving. You're given problems to solve that you never dealt with before, but you need to work in groups in order to resolve those problems. Flexibility, emotional intelligence. The article continues to say all of these precious human personal traits, in my understanding, meaning Mr. Gualea, based solely on intrapersonal and interpersonal communication skills. And he said on the basis of it all, communication is the key to a victorious processes and projects. In other words, in order for projects and processes to be successful, we need communication. It is a vital resource. And you know, I have this photograph of from the caveman era, and I'm going to drive home the point in the next slide. So he went on to say that technological innovations move forward, but the challenge of conversing remains. So the point here is, regardless of what technology we have, regardless of how awesome the technology is, whatever it can do, the challenge remains that we need, as humans, we have a need to talk, to converse, to communicate. And as I said there, whether it's in the caveman era or it is in the era of Industry 4.0, we need to communicate. And as a result of that, we're going to look at what are some of the other things that people did. So in the previous era, this is how people communicate. These are some examples of how people communicated. And I'm sure you would have read or heard about some of these, and depending on the ages of our audience tonight, you obviously would have experienced some of these. For example, as a boy growing up, radio was the preferred means of communication, as well as television, but more so radio. We still use telephones, but obviously not the one that I have on the graphic. And prior to that, we had things like the Morse code, started off with cave drawings, messages on stone columns, telegraphs. Do people still use telegraphs? I don't know, maybe I still see them advertised somewhere. The use of drums, the ship's flags, smoke signals, fire signals, as well as the pigeons that carried messages. And now we have the Internet of Things. We have everything you can think about, from, as I said, smart television to CNN, Twitter, Facebook, and you know all of the communication mechanisms that we use today. But in all of these, whether it is in the caveman era or in the era of Industry 4.0, the human touch, the human element is critical. Who drew those drawings on the caves? Yeah? Who wrote those messages on the stones? Who tied that message onto the pigeon's legs? Yeah? Who was behind the microphone at the radio station, etc., etc. And today, whether we get our communication or we communicate via email or we get our information via blogs or vlogs or social media, we have a human or a combination collective of human beings who are behind creating those messages for us. So in whatever era we are, human beings are critical in the communication process. Now, as I said, human beings are very critical in the communication process, and we all need to communicate. In this era, as I said as well, being a skilled communicator is a very treasured prize. Whatever job you're looking for these days, communication skills is one of the critical things that employers look for. And I would like you, those of you following us on social media, to just type in the chat or the comments feature, in your view, just put there one person that you regard as a skilled communicator. And my definition for a skilled communicator is someone who provides timely information that people need to know to make accurate decisions, do their jobs well, and feel good about being a member of the team or organization. And that is taken from an article by Mr. Easy. And I want to suggest to you that there are a number of skilled communicators that we know. Some of them have passed on. I'm not able to follow the chat, but I'm sure you would have put yours in the, the chat on Facebook or on YouTube. But I want to suggest to you, in my time, some of the most skilled communicators, two of the most skilled communicators that I have seen are this man right here, Mr. Barack Obama, former president of the United States, as well as Mr. Larry King. For those of you who followed CNN, Larry King was an expert television host, CNN, and really excellent communicator. Barack Obama, no doubt about that. He can convince you very clearly and always takes his audience along with him. So what are some of the skills that you need or that we need communicators? Yeah, as I said, I hope that you have already typed in the comment section what you think a skilled communicator, excellent communicator is. And you can also tell us what makes that person stand out to you as a skilled communicator. I have given you some of the traits of Barack Obama, why I think he is such a skilled communicator. And what things are they doing that you can learn or that we can learn from them as skilled communicators. So right now I'm going to go on to some critical communication skills. I call them vital communication skills. This graphic has them listed as essential communication skills for your career. And these 10 skills are listening, nonverbal communication, clarity and conciseness, friendliness, confidence, empathy, open-mindedness, respect, feedback, and picking the right medium. Let's dwell on these for a little bit. All right, so listening is one of the most critical communication skills. Being a good listener is one of the best to be a good communicator. You know, very often some people say that we listen in order to respond, not to understand. So tonight we want you to remember that when you're listening to understand, to communicate, not just simply to respond. Non-verbal, we can deal with some of those later in the presentation, but your body language is so critical in communication. Eye contact, your hand gestures, as you see, I love using my hands in my communication. Your tone of voice and all also color the message that you're trying to convey. Today, a session with some accounting students from the University of the West Indies, and we spent quite a lot of time speaking about this whole issue of tone, because tone when you're communicating, and your tone doesn't necessarily have to be when you're speaking only, but also when you're writing and your non-verbal communication skills. As you know, they say that about 80% of our communication is non-verbal. So your body language, your posture, your eye contact, your handshake, and all of these things are part of the non-verbal. But critically, your tone, is it harsh? Is it humorous? You know, is it sincere? I mean, you know, and as I said, we need to take into consideration tone, not only when we are speaking verbally, but when we are writing emails, when we are sending text, to ensure that our tone does not offend the people we are trying to communicate with, but facilitates our communication. Clarity and try to convey your message in as few words as possible. Don't talk too much or too little. You know, I think we are all aware of that one person or club or in our workplace who can give you a story in 2 sentences, and then those who would give you that same story in 2 paragraphs or 2 textbooks or two exercise books rather. So try to be clear and in your message. Friendliness, through a friendly tone, a personal question, or a simple smile, as well as politeness. Try to be polite in your communication. It encourages people to come to you, it draws people to you to interact with you. Confidence. And confidence is another critical communication skill. It shows your audience that you believe in what you're saying, and exuding confidence can be as simple as making eye contact or use firm but friendly tone. You know, and what are some of the things that can help? Making sure that you're prepared for your meeting. If you're doing a presentation, ensuring that you're well prepared for that presentation. And, you know, and as we said here, the eye contact, the firm handshake, but not too tight, but firm enough to show that this is a confident person. The way you sit, posture, the way you speak, the way you dress can exude confidence as well. Showing empathy is also a very good communication skill, using simple terms such as I understand where you're coming from, or I empathize with you. Demonstrate respect and understanding even when you have a different view. I mean, we need to get to the point where we can agree to disagree and we understand somebody's perspective, even though we do not necessarily agree with it. And we can empathize with people who have different perspectives than we do or share. Open-mindedness. Be open to listening and understanding other people's point of view, similar to what I was saying just now, rather than simply getting your message across. If you want to communicate effectively with others, you need to be open-minded because they may have a different view, share a different view than you have. Yeah, so be open-minded and listen to what they have to say before you try to get your message across. Respect. People will be more open to communicating with you if you convey respect for them and their ideas. So remember that listening to what people have to say, learning people's names who you're communicating with, making eye contact, And as I said again, active listening is so critical in showing respect and to others. Feedback. Giving feedback involves giving praise as well as sometimes saying a good job and thanks for taking care of that. You can also give feedback that is constructive. Always try to make your feedback constructive. So the person may have done something that was not all that great, but within what they did, there is some good. So find the good in what they have done. In Toastmasters, we talk about the sandwich technique. So you give the good, you give the area that they need to develop in, and then you finish the feedback with something good so that the person leave your conversation feeling positive. So learn to give constructive feedback and feedback that makes the person feel good when they have listened to what feedback you have given to them. Picking the right medium. This is so important because sometimes we have really good things to say, but we use the inappropriate medium in order to convey the message. And therefore, we do not communicate because we did not use the appropriate medium. So again, when you are communicating, if you're communicating for your company or with your team, you need to select the right medium, whether it's email, whether it's a graphic, whether it's a letter, or it can be a face-to-face meeting. The right medium is critically important to your communication. So these are 10 communication skills that I want to suggest to you are very critical in this era as we work through Industry 4.0. But as I said, when I gave you the definition for communication, there are several barriers to communication, and they're categorized in 3 ways: physical, emotional, and language barriers. And cultural barriers, cultural differences can be significant barriers to communication. As I said, in this era of Industry 4.0, we work across cultures, we work across languages, we work across geographical spaces. So cultural differences need to be taken into consideration when you are crafting communication messages or having a conversation with someone who may not necessarily be from your culture. So for example, I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If I'm speaking exclusively to a Vincentian audience, I can afford to use certain expressions and adage. But however, I'm speaking now to an international audience who may not be able to identify with some of those Vincentian sayings, or I'm living in Barbados, so I have a pretty good grasp of some of the Barbados sayings, but I cannot use those in an international environment because some of my colleagues are from India, they're from Australia or Singapore, I would lose them. Yeah, so cultural differences, very significant barrier to communication. So remember that. Language, no, and I have in brackets technical as well as ethnic. So some persons who work in particular fields, they have very specific career language that they use, technical language that they use. And, they're communicating and you wonder, is this really for me or is this for somebody, for example, a doctor or engineer, even people in IT and so on. Very technical language. This is a major barrier to communication. So if you cannot break it down yourself, then you need to find a communication specialist who can do that for you if you want to communicate. Ethnicity is also a communication, a barrier to communication. Again, because people may be raised differently, they have different customs, they have different languages and so on. So you need to take that into consideration as well. Personality, some persons are just not talkers. Some persons do not like people too close in their personal space. So you need to take that into consideration as well. Some persons love to talk, so they can communicate with you for an entire hour without even blinking. Yeah? Lack of active listening. I spoke about this in the positive way earlier when I said that listening is a critical communication skill. On the reverse, lack of active listening is a significant barrier to communication. Generational. Now, isn't this an interesting one? I mean, and particularly in the era of Industry 4.0, where it seems as though our children are born with an electronic device. You know, whether it's a tablet or a phone, it seems as if they're born with them. Whereas our mothers and our grandmothers and so on, they are from a totally different age where these things are foreign to them, and some of them have decided that, you know, this is not for me, this is for the young people. So communicating with them is also important, and we need to find ways to break down the generational barrier. I know of the more mature persons in the golden years have learned to use WhatsApp so they can communicate with their grandchildren or their children who are overseas. Yeah, technological barrier also relates to the generational gap. And I would say to you that for those of us who are middle, we can relate to both the younger ones as well as to our parents or grandparents, because we are smack in the middle and we sort of straddle both the generation and the technological age barrier. Prejudices, well, we all know what that means. People come to you with their stereotypes and they try to communicate with you based on those stereotypes and prejudices, whether it's you know, educational level or societal status, and people come to you and they try to communicate with you based on those. But those are barriers to communication as well. And the use of jargon. You know, again, 4.2 as an example, where a lot of our young people, they use the text language to communicate. And sometimes I hear some of my teaching complain about that, and my son is shaking his head, nodding his head, saying, yes, Daddy, you're saying the right thing. But it is because in a formal setting, the use of jargon and text message, text language and chat language is not acceptable. And it also comes back to my point about the technical language, that things are over complicated and over the head of people, and that is a barrier, because you need to ensure that the communication is understood by the persons who are receiving the communication. Otherwise, you have not communicated. Yeah, and as I said, use of technical terms, try and cut those when you're speaking to everyday persons. If you're communicating within your professional circles, people who are familiar with your industry, then it is fine when you are speaking. So a group of IT guys speaking to IT guys, or engineers speaking to engineers, or doctors to doctors, or lawyers to lawyers, that's fine. But if you're talking to the general public, then, you know, we need to ensure that we minimize or cut out the jargon altogether. So, having told you about the barriers to communication, here are some practical solutions that you can use to resolve them. And as I said, we need to practice cultural sensitivity. In our age, in our era of Industry 4.0, cultural sensitivity is critical. As I said, we operate in a globalized environment. So in your workplace, you may have persons from several different races, just several languages, several religions. So you need to be culturally sensitive when you're communicating in that environment. Use simple words. I mean, again, as I said, we all know that one person in the office who uses all of the big words he or she can, come and tell you discombobulate, rather than just saying confused, you know? So try to use simple words so that everyone understands what you're talking about. The use of nonverbal, as I said, it's 80% of how we communicate by body language, and the positive body language I'm referring to. clarify your ideas. So never take it for granted that the ideas that you have shared, whether it's in a work setting or in a club setting, that your ideas are understood by the persons in the audience. Yeah? You need to clarify those ideas, especially if they're new ideas, especially if the people are hearing them for the first time. And you can also do that by checking understanding. So you're speaking to an audience and you want to make sure that your ideas are understood. You can ask someone in that audience or a few persons in the audience, can you explain to me what I just said, or can you give me what your understanding of what I explained 2 minutes ago is? So checking understanding, clarifying those ideas are just some of the solutions that we can use to break down the barriers to communication. As I said, practice cultural sensitivity, use the nonverbal, and use simple words. And of course, make sure that you listen actively. All right, so I said that you can check your understanding, and you do that by asking questions. And the use of questions in communication is an excellent strategy. And I just want to explain here that there are basically two types of questions: closed questions and open questions. And of course, there are other variants to those subgroups like leading questions, etc. So if we look at the open questions and what they do in a communication setting, and they help you to get more information. So you want to get more information, you ask open questions. You want to elicit opinions and ideas, you ask open questions. You can use them as well to gain consensus in a meeting or in a discussion group. You can use open questions to gain consensus, as well as to focus the conversation. Sometimes you're in a meeting and everyone goes off tangent. You use the open question for, do you remember why we are in this meeting in the first place? Or, what is the purpose of this meeting again? Open questions. And generally open questions begin with the words such as what, who, and why. That's how you start the open questions, so that you can elicit opinions, get information, and gain consensus. On the other hand, the closed questions, you generally get restricted responses. So you may get a 1-word or 2-word response. They're generally overused. You can also use them if you want to end the conversation or to close out the conversation. And they require very little effort. And of course, you can use them to get yes and no answers. And these begins with words such as is or are, did or do, has, have, would, will, was, were, may I, or can I. And there, I want to thank you for your time. That brings me to the end of my presentation, but I'm sure you may have some questions or comments, and you can engage in a discussion. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. That was indeed an invigorating and really a reminder for myself as well, because I know that even though we communicate very frequently, it's something we do on a daily basis. There are a lot of times when you get into the habit of doing something, it's hard to break. So you need those reminders to help you to not only improve on your communication for your own benefit, but for the benefit of those on the receiving end. So thank you so much for that presentation.
You're most welcome, Jamie.
Of course. So we had a couple questions coming in from Facebook and YouTube. From Facebook, one user suggested the use of tools such as Grammarly to help with identifying the tones of emails. What do you think about this approach? And do you have any other suggestions or tools that persons can use to enhance their communication skills, especially when they're relaying information about Industry 4.0?
Right. So, I mean, that's the awesome thing about the era in which we live. There is a tool for everything. As the saying said, there's an app for that.
Very true. Very true.
App for that. I would give you a joke that my sons and I traveled during the Christmas vacation. And when we returned home, we had to quarantine. And part of the requirement of quarantining is taking your temperatures every day. But we do not have
Uh-huh.
a thermometer in our house. The average person doesn't have a thermometer in their house. So I said to my oldest son, look on your phone for a thermometer app, and bam, there was a thermometer app. So we were able to use that every day to take our temperatures. So certainly, if you can find other tools that you can use to check tone. As I said earlier today, I did a presentation with some UE accounting students for Toastmasters. And I spent quite a lot of time on the whole issue of tone, because I think very often we underestimate the importance of the use of tone in what we do. And especially Caribbean people, I think we take a lot of things for granted because we are so informal. Yeah. So we make up our faces in particular ways. Yeah. We express words in particular ways. And sometimes we can be very harsh. And I think, communicating in an environment such as Industry 4.0, where you're communicating in a globalized environment, the whole issue of the tone that we use in the region. So, I mean, I might be able to use it when I'm communicating with the guys who I went to school with, and they will be fine.
Right.
But I'm using this with somebody, who is from Europe or some other place in Asia or something, they might find it pretty offensive. So we need to
Or
be
even
really
across
careful.
countries.
Precisely. Yeah.
In the region.
So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of tools. You can find them if you need help. Google that. Yeah.
That's very true. Very true. Google is literally everybody's personal assistant. And keeping in that same vein of tone and empathy, there's a comment coming in from YouTube saying that showing empathy, listening attentively, being respectful, which are some of the vital communication skills that you had shared, appearing genuinely interested in what others have to say are just some of the traits that make her a great communicator. And they were talking about Oprah Winfrey.
Oh yes, definitely. Well, I'm happy to hear they actually carried out my exercise. I mean, you can't beat people like Oprah Winfrey. As I said, I use Larry King as well, because in a different era, I was a CNN addict. But yeah, I mean, empathy is also so important in communication, especially in certain environments. I mean, for people like counselors and teachers and so on, who interact with students who may be going through different issues from time to time, the trait of empathy is critical.
Definitely. And I also have some questions that I took on my phone as I was listening to your presentation, and especially as I was thinking about how we communicate effectively in this new age of Industry 4.0. And after I ask my question, I'll actually loop in Dr. Wahid Shipstone, who's in the Zoom room with us, who is one of our colleagues at the Whiteboard Labs, who can come in and give some insight as well, because he's an expert in this field. But as I was thinking about your the skills that you were sharing, the various vital communication skills, how does one apply these skills, of empathy and confidence and open-mindedness, feedback, etc., when sharing updates relating to information within the Industry 4.0 in a field? Because especially a lot of persons get very intimidated when it comes to anything, like you mentioned, Industry 4.0 related, because it feels like it's just about blockchain and data and tech. And even the wording and the language within that field can be very intimidating. How do you navigate that space and break down those communication barriers using those skills that you had shared?
Very, very good question. And it would allow me as well to speak to my friends who are asking me in the last couple of weeks about, what is I4.0. So as you said, one of the things we have to do, we have to recognize first and foremost that not everybody we are communicating with at our level or is at that particular level that you may be at. Yeah? So you need to take that. So that's the first thing. So understand that you're communicating with an audience who may not know the thing you do. Yes? So that's the first thing. You need to understand that. And that's where the empathy comes in, that, look, I have this email, something to do about smart computers or smart television. The average person 50 and over, I mean, is probably now learning about smart television and so on. You need to break that information down and take information that they do not. So start on the premise that they do not know. So if you start on the premise that they do not know, then you're going to start so that you're bringing them up with you and not speaking over their heads. Secondly, you want to use simple terms that they can understand. So, I mean, as I was saying, rather than talking about the Internet of Things, I mean, how many of us in our everyday life refer to terms such as the Internet of Things? Maybe the computer science guys at Harvard or Oxford or somewhere. But on an average everyday life, we're not talking about the Internet of Things. We're talking about connecting our phones to this or connecting Jamie to Cleveland via Zoom or something like that. So use terms that the average person is going to understand. And that means using simple words. If you're going to use, if you have to use a technical term, put the simplified version in brackets. In other words, put the English in brackets, you know, so that you do not lose people. In terms of using tone in that respect, again, you want to come across as if you are bringing the people along, not as if you are talking over their head or beating them over their head or making them seem as if they're ignorant, right? You want to come across as caring. I want you to understand this, and I am doing this in a way to make you understand. I would stop there for now, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. And I think at this stage we could bring in Dr. Shipstone. Are you still with us, Rohit?
Hi, Jamie. Yeah, sure. I'm here.
Hi, thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to bring you in just so that I could allow the audience to experience your insight as well on the topic of communication in Industry 4.0. As we heard Dr. Sam's presentation, it was extremely invigorating, some salient reminders. But in your perspective, how do you apply those skills within the Industry 4.0 field?
Well, to start with, I don't know if there's much more I can add to that wonderful presentation by Dr. Sam. Truly, I mean, the way you have stitched the whole thing together, it was amazing. And with your permission, we'd like to go
Thank you,
on
sir.
using this. This is really wonderful. I don't think there's much more I can add to that, except 2 points which Dr. Sam has actually referred to, but I thought let me just highlight those. So the aspect of Industry 4.0 as we are in today, uh, one is that they're mainly human to human communication. You see, there's very little human to machine or machine to human, right? Going
Yeah.
forward, that will also come up tremendously. As of now, it is there in small applications, not very well known, etc. Right. The point is, what Dr. Sam has pointed out is absolutely applicable to human, but it is absolutely applicable to machine as well. And so, therefore, communications is going to stay for a long time. And all those abilities or competencies or traits that Dr. Sam talked about will go into it. So I'll just like to give a small example of what's coming up next. Call it industry 5, 6, 7, I don't know what they'll call it finally. But let's take the example which is starting out today and is in use to some extent, where the machine recognizes, when I say machine, I mean whatever device you're talking to, right? It actually recognizes your facial expressions and conveys a opinion at the other end. A lot of recruiters today, companies, do these interviews on Zoom or whatever, right? Or some tool. Okay. Uh, some of them probably do have a software which is analyzing the candidate's facial expressions.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So two things are very necessary here. Number one, the point that Dr. Sam made of non-verbal communication. No, I would underscore that because it's important. It's critical not only for human to human. It's also critical for human to machine. You better not think you're at the other end and thinking, and somebody is not noticing. Somebody is noticing.
Very
Okay,
true.
so that is one. Secondly, whether it is human to human or human to machine or whatever, whichever configuration you take it at, accuracy of communication is extremely critical. Right now, I'm sure you must have heard about the Chinese whispers. Okay, and that has to stop because, as Dr. Sam said, active listening, your accuracy depends on your listening.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
And if you've not actively or prudently listened or consciously listened, what you will convey may be 110% or it may be 70% of the truth. Now
Very
that
true.
is a situation
Yeah,
to be avoided completely in 4.0 and absolutely beyond that, because if you go and convey something less or more than what is there to a machine, the machine has no mind. It will just interpret what you're saying and do whatever you're saying to do.
precisely.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll
Yes.
probably end up corrupting the whole organization's systems. So
Exactly.
those are the only 2 points. Over to you, Sam.
Dr. Shipstone, if I may, Jimmy, if I may just add, I mean, I didn't want to get in too much into the whole issue of human to machine communication, but it is so important that at the end of the day, as Dr. Shipstone said, whether it's human to human or human to machine, that even though you're going human to machine, somebody needs to program that machine to understand,
Exactly.
to read the codes, to interpret the codes that is being sent. So as he said, it is as if I remember 20 years ago that everybody was predicting the days of the newspaper because of the internet. But 20 years on, the newspaper is still pretty much here. So I'm relating that to human communication and the need for the human touch, that regardless of whatever industry period we are in, whether it's 1.0 or 10.0, we are going to need human. We are going to need human communication because, as I said, humans need to program the robots that are going to make the cars. Humans need,
Yeah.
the robot that's going to be cooking our food in 20 years, a human is going to be programming that robot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just to tie all of that in, because we have another question coming in from Facebook. I think that, and I really find this question that very interesting because the user is asking, how, if you have any tips on how to listen more effectively, because active listening is a critical aspect of communication, but we often plan our responses, and that reminds me of when he typed plan our responses, how we have predictive text on our phone, and we have predictive everything with our when we're typing in even using tools like Grammarly. That's how that platform works. It works on predicting what we're about to say. So in an age where we have
Yeah.
this kind of microwave response, we have to have things very quickly and rapidly. How do we actively listen, and how do you listen more effectively so that our responses don't feel too predictive?
Jamie, I have a
Right.
tip.
So very good question. Sorry, Dr. Shipstone, let me just make a point here.
Sure.
It comes back to my issue of respect. If we are communicating and you have any respect for me, you're treating me as an equal in that conversation, in that communication, you should be able to listen. And to me, it's a sign of respect as well, that you are listening to me it shows me that you're respecting. As I said, very often we practice listening to respond, as you quite well said, Jamie. But we need to listen in order to communicate, in order to hear. And that starts by showing respect for the person who is speaking and vice versa. I will let Dr. Shipstone come in and I'll come.
Sure, sure.
I was just responding to the question that was asked, if there are any tips. Well, I have a big tip. All of these things that Dr. Sam has talked about, you can learn in our program, which is the Industry 4.0 training program run by UWI and Whiteboard Labs, including active listening.
That's a good
including
plug.
active
That's a
listening.
great
So
plug.
all you have to do is log in and start.
Definitely,
Yes.
definitely. And I
Jamie,
would
go ahead, Jamie.
I would say those two go hand in hand. So having that respect and then seeing how you could use practical technical skills from experts like that we have here at the Open Campus and Whiteboard Labs to help you apply those skills.
Right. So just to add to your tip again, as I said, I would come back, and someone on WhatsApp sent me a message, and she said, pay attention. As I said, that's part of respect. Pay attention to what the person is saying. Show that you're listening, and you do that by providing feedback and deferring judgment. So all of this, as I said, comes down to the question of respect. Are you paying attention to me? I'm speaking to you. Yes, pay attention. You're listening actively. You defer judgment because why? You're providing feedback and you're listening actively because you showing respect for communicating with this person.
Definitely. And I think that that's an important practice that we have that it's very, especially now when we're always on our phones and we have new feed and new content coming at us every couple of seconds. You press the refresh button and there's something new. We have these short attention spans, but it shows an immense level of respect when you can put your phone down and hone in on the person who's talking to you and really have a meaningful and engaging conversation. And so just as we're about to wrap
Jamie,
up, I know that
you just give one of the biggest tips for the night. Put the phone down.
I tell my parents all the time, trust me.
Turn off the television, for example, put the phone down, turn off the television and listen to me. That's active listening.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think we could go on and how we could be effective communicators and effective listeners. But like we all agree in our discussion this evening is that it's about applying it and practicing it and being intentional with our listening and being intentional with applying those vital communication skills, because it's not hard. It's just a matter of doing it. And as we're wrapping up, it's 2 minutes to the hour, and I think we've been making really good time. Dr. Sam, Dr. Shipstone, this has been invigorating for me because I feel like I'm not the best communicator. I'm a very good listener, but I struggle with the confidence of communication. So anything that reminds me that I have all the skills at my fingertips that in web jams like this to help me improve communication, I'm very grateful for. So thank you so much for your presentation. We want to thank the listeners, the viewers who have tuned into this web jam session, who shared their questions and their comments and their thoughts with us. We are here all the time. Just keep tuned to our Facebook page. And the recording for this session is not only is available on our Facebook page, and whenever we stream live from YouTube as well. And I forgot to mention that at the start, so I had to put that in there, Cleveland. So thank you again for joining us. Look out for more series, more installments of the Web Jam series on our Facebook page, and stay safe. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Shipstone, as well, for the opportunity. Good night, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.